Every year since I have been on BookTube, I have read the Women's Prize for Fiction Shortlist, and it's been a bit of a mixed bag.
But it felt more like a clever idea than a well-executed one.
I really didn't like this book. I found the ending incredibly irritating.
So this year I have decided to do something a little bit different, thanks to a comment from Kristen Lee 7575, who said, "I read the long list every year and often think I will cut it to just the shortlist, but then I remember that each year my favourite book on the long list didn't make it to the shortlist. Perhaps look at the long list and pick up the ones you fancy." That comment was left on my trying to predict the Women's Prize for Fiction video from this year, which I'll leave linked in the cards above if you want to see how badly I did at that. And so it got me thinking, instead of reading the shortlist and reading books that I don't like and I'm confused as to why have been made to the shortlist, I'm going to read books that I think should be on the shortlist. Obviously, I would only know this for certain if I had read all 16 of the books on the long list, which is not something I'm prepared to do. Instead, I'm going to read the 6 books on the long list that speak to me the most. See if I know my own taste better than the Women's Prize for Fiction judges do. So the first thing I did was, when the Women's Prize for Fiction long list was announced, I read each of the blurbs as it is shown on the Women's Prize for Fiction website. And this is the order that they went in. There is one book on the long list, Western Lane by Chetna Maru, which I read last year as it was also shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I did enjoy it, but I didn't love it, so I've decided not to include it in my 6 books. So these are the 15 in the order in which their blurb and their cover, to be perfectly honest, spoke to me. But now what I'm going to do is go on to Instagram and Goodreads and Storygraph and read some reviews of each of the books and see if that changes my shortlist at all. Okay, so I've read reviews for all of them, and that wasn't 100% fair. Some of them have been out nearly a year and some of them haven't actually come out in the UK yet. So there was definitely a different number of reviews for everything, but I feel like I've got a pretty comprehensive list. So this is my list in order after reading the reviews. What came across that interested me is that a lot of them are really similar. So Enter Ghost, The Wren, Ordinary Human Failings, and In Defence of the Act, and 8 Lives of a Centuries-Old Trickster were both in the top 6 for both their blurb and the reviews, for how much each of those interested me. Soldier Sailor I was interested in because of the reviews, but was one of the ones I was at least interested in from the concept. And River East, River West is one that I was very interested in from the premise, but one that the reviews kind of didn't speak to me. So I've also included Hangman instead of either of those, because that was number 1 for me after the blurbs and number 7 after the reviews. So it almost made the cut from the reviews and was my favourite of the premises. So those are the 6 books that I will be reading: Hangman, The Wren, Enter Ghost, Ordinary Human Failings, 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster, and In Defence of the Act. I will now reserve them at my library and also probably find some audiobooks as well to get through them, and I hopefully, fingers crossed, will have read them before the shortlist is announced, and if that has happened, you'll have seen the video already. And fingers crossed I enjoyed these 6 books more than I have enjoyed any of the shortlists in the past. I have started In Defence of the Act by Effie Black. I'm 20% of the way into it now. It's a very short little book. This is about a woman who is a biologist and a researcher. I think you might be on the piss. Sorry if you are, I can't see. But she researches suicide in animals, and she is defending suicide. She thinks that suicide shouldn't be considered to be this taboo, difficult subject, and it has started with her sort of talking directly to you as the reader. She's writing something to you, and it is in first person. It feels like a kind of quirkily written non-fiction in a way that I'm not really enjoying. If no other females are present, she lets the males waste their time trying to fertilise non-existent eggs and carries on living. If she's surrounded by kin, but the male spiders are ignoring her in favour of kin, she hangs around to watch. But if she thinks she's getting in the way of her genes being passed on, getting in the way not by being an old hag, but an irresistible old hottie, she does herself in. Evolutionary, this makes far more sense than the arguably ageist and sexist initial interpretations. So you can see it's kind of I'm not sure I like the writing style particularly of that part, but it is now moving into more her talking about her memories and her past, because this suicide, her sort of fixation with suicide, we've started with one way that's interacted with her life, but I feel like there's going to be more of that as we go on. And it's reading more like women's fiction than literary. is in that chatty, commercial, contemporary style, and isn't doing much in terms of the actual writing, but I will continue with it and see. I think the lowest on my list, so we'll see how it goes, and if I DNF, I'll see what that means to me in terms of reading, if I need to pick another one or not. Hello, I am halfway through the In Defense of the Act now. I don't feel much differently about it. There was a moment with a not very well disguised, what is that book called? The one with the anguished face, A Little Life, in it, where they talk about it in a book group, only really to talk about characters' like relationship to suicide, and how it relates to literature and things. It feels a lot like we have a barely concealed non-fiction about suicide, and then this kind of traumatic person's life and their experience of trauma and their non-acceptance of that, and like just lots of really sad things keep going on around them in a really depressing way, and I guess that's why A Little Life was referenced. But for me, yeah, it's the writing. I'm still like, it's compelling enough for me to want to read it, and the writing is very easy to get through because it was written in that breezy kind of non-fiction style. Despite the fact that it's talking about trauma, there is a pop non-fiction style to it. It is very pop. I think even the cover looks like a popular non-fiction, and so that makes sense for it. So it is very easy to read, even if it's not the most fun or interesting read. But I think I'll keep going. Maybe something will happen, there will be some sort of revelation, but so far it just feels a bit like, yeah, I get it, you're depressed and therefore you think that suicide might be okay. I don't think it's doing a very nuanced job of discussing that, because I think that's a really interesting idea, which is why I chose this book, but I don't think it's doing a particularly good job of discussing the reasonings of this person. I finished In Defense of the Act and I don't like it. It's not a bad book. It was perfectly like readable and perfectly fine, but I don't think it achieved what it set out to achieve, and I don't think it was particularly interesting either. Our main character here defends suicide and thinks that sometimes suicide might be for the best, but the book doesn't actually do that. The book has no interest in exploring that as a philosophical idea. It very much downplays, underplays our main character's point of view, and it changes her point of view in several different perspectives that I didn't appreciate the way that it did that. It's not quite as brutal as The Little Life, but it's definitely fairly brutal, and it wanted to look at the light, the hope, the beauty that is still in a difficult life, which is fine, but not particularly interesting, not particularly novel. And I thought that the same was true of the writing. Like I said, it reminded me of pop non-fiction in some aspects, and it reminded me of women's fiction, in terms of it being fairly simplistic, chatty, like a magazine style writer. Did a lot of stuff that I just didn't appreciate. Like, there were a lot of times where it became really obvious what the writer was doing. Like, there is a point where there were a couple of points, but one significant one where something has been signaled to us as a plot point that is about to happen, but then the writer like slows way down and is obviously trying to build tension, because you know what the main character is about to happen to the main character, but the main character doesn't know, and we are staying in that moment before they know. But it just got dragged out so much that it felt like a cheap trick, rather than being effective. It didn't build the tension. It actually lost tension because I just saw the writer appear and play this cheap trick, and I didn't appreciate that. It felt like the writer was like patting themselves on the back for how cool this part was, and I don't ever want to see the writer unless that is intentional on the part of the writer, which I definitely don't think it was here. So I definitely think this was a miss. I picked the wrong book for my first read for the Women's Prize shortlist. Right now I'm in my dungarees, as you can tell, because I'm about to do some gardening. I got some plants from this small company called Dig Club, where you say what aspect it is, your flower bed is, what size it is, and like you pick a style, and they send you a load of flowers, a load of plants. It was quite expensive for the amount of plants you get, but they have like designed a garden, and I know nothing really about plants, so them knowing they should be good for like my north facing flower bed, and that is dark most of the time, I'm happy to pay a little bit more for the expertise. Hello, so I am 20% of the way into The Wren by Enright, and it is reminding me that I need to read more Irish fiction. There's just something about the voice and the humour of Irish fiction that really works for me, because it is a common thread that I've noticed in a lot of Irish fiction. This is the story of Nell, who is just outside of university and has entered into a relationship with this man that she fell in love with kind of instantly, who is abusive, and it's about their sex life and their life. That description sounds very dour, but it's actually a lot more like internal to our main character's life and a lot more amusing and referential to the world than it is like dour and dark. Our main character's mother, Carmel, is also a big character in it, and their relationship, their kind of stilted relationship with one another. Carmel, not all about her, but parts of her remind me of my mum and like my aunts and things. The sort of, you will not have as many problems if you just stop thinking about yourself so much attitude, and the will tear down the world if something is wrong for you, but that's not necessarily the most helpful thing, like a fierce protectiveness that doesn't actually allow for vulnerability. She's a very realistic character to me. It also feels like it's just about to change. The voice of the audiobook narration has just changed, and the grandfather has just been introduced, who was a poet. So I think we're going to be changing perspective a little bit, and I'm interested to see where it goes. I am halfway through The Wren by Enright, and this book is so beautiful. It is so beautifully written. I am loving every part of it. I actually think we've gone into Carmel's story now, who is the mother of Nell, who was the majority of the first 20%, and I love her as a character. I think she is brilliant, and I also think that her writing is so much more poetic and lovely, and at the same time being simple. Like, she's a very matter-of-fact, straightforward character, and yet there is this lovely poeticness, and it's kind of an echo of her father, who was this poet, and we see his kind of fecklessness, at least to begin with, and it's interspersed with parts of his poetry that are showing this sort of beautiful, idealised rural Ireland, and then contrasting that with the life that Carmel is actually leading in the real Ireland, though of course it's still fictionalised, and I think it's just wonderful. I really love the writing, as I said, and I will, when I have a physical copy of it, which has just come into the library, I will read you some parts of it and insert them here because they're just so gorgeous. Modern parts of it I like less than I like Carmel's parts. It is very much in that theme of young women experiencing sex as violence and sex as self-harm, and like the difficulties of modern dating and relationships with porn and like all of that involved in it, and this sort of disconnected relationship that she has with him, kind of her using it to disconnect from herself and her lack of understanding of her own wants, apart from how she's perceived. She's constantly outside of herself, perceiving herself, and it's interesting, but it's not, I've read loads of stuff like that, so whilst it's still beautiful, I feel like it feels a little like someone older writing someone younger, but I'm still enjoying it still. Hello, I have finished The Wren by Enright, and I really enjoyed it. The writing is so beautiful. Carmel as a character, I loved her, and we also get to see from Phil's perspective the way it's just about these three characters and the way that they move through their life, dealing with the darkness and the difficulties of it, their sort of coping mechanisms and their resilience, and the difficulties of their relationships with one another across time. Like, Nell never met her granddad Phil, but she communes with him through poetry. Just thought it was such a wonderful character study, really well written and well built. These characters, they felt so real to me, particularly Carmel. And I think if you haven't read it, yeah, I think so far it's my favourite. I've read of all the books I've read, but I've only finished 2 of them, so we've got more to go. Hello, so I have read 20% of 8 Lives of a Centuries-Old Trickster, and I'm DNFing this book. I read some of the reviews that said that it was more like a collection of short stories that linked loosely by being the story of this one woman's life, a collection of short stories that are kind of telling Korean history, and I thought it sounded interesting. However, the writing is really just not for me. The writing just doesn't work. It is both at the same time overtly flowery and also overly simplistic. Like, it's sometimes trying so hard to be flowery, but the most of the writing is actually fairly simple and kind of too far too simplistic, which I think in part is because it's set in this historical time period. The two different short stories I've read are set just after the Korean War and before Korean independence from Japan, and both of them are told in very modern English, which really jars with what the time period is, which is interesting because obviously it would be in Korean, so we are just translating it kind of from Korean, even though obviously Mirinae Lee wrote in English. What I mean is that the people who are speaking in this are ostensibly speaking Korean, and so it's translating to English. And I recently read Glorious Exploits, which was set in ancient Corinth but told with like modern Irish English rather than in a sort of standard classical style. But I still felt like the way that people were talking, it just didn't seem to fit with the time period, and yeah, I just didn't really love the writing, and I knew I just wasn't going to learn to love the writing, so I've decided to give this one up, and instead I'm going to be picking up River East, River West. So when I have begun that one, I will tell you more about it. Hello, so I have finished the first sleeve. I am getting really far into this now, but the wedding is on Saturday and today is Thursday, so whilst I am far into this, I am also behind. So if you can see this here, yes, so far I have done one sleeve and I made it shorter, so it's supposed to come to your wrist, but I have seen people saying the sleeves grew, so I made it like, go away. I made it this length so that if it does grow, it will just be the normal length, and if it doesn't, I like a sleeve that comes down to here, as you can tell from my dress sleeve that also comes to here. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how it's looking so far, but I just have to finish the second sleeve, and then hopefully I will have time to block it before the wedding, so that it doesn't so that everything looks a bit neater and the edges look a bit neater as well. I'm also halfway through River East, River West, which is about a young girl in 2007. Oh, she's young, she's 14, and she is living in Shanghai. She's half Chinese, half American, and her mother has married a Chinese man who is not her father, a different Chinese man, and she's not particularly happy with it, not particularly happy with her mother, or growing up in the school that she's in, and being mixed race in China and the way she's treated by her classmates. And then also it flashes back to a man in the 1980s, but also we see his time in the 60s as well, in the Cultural Revolution in China. And yeah, so far not as good as the Wren, but I am enjoying it too. So I've got 2 days to power through this final sleeve. Sleeves always take longer than they seem like they will. Hello, so we've come to the wedding and I am wearing the cardigan. I haven't talked you through the end of it yet because I had to finish it for the wedding. The bow is not quite as voluminous and it's kind of high up, which is a weird thing, so I've obviously done something wrong when I changed it a little bit because I wanted it to be cropped and because of the thickness of my wool, but I still think it looks pretty cute. Yeah, still pretty cute. So, and it's my first ever finished garment. Hello, I'm not sure if I checked in with you halfway through River East, River West, but I have now finished it, and it was okay. I think so it is about two different time periods, a man in the 60s and then the 80s who lives in Shanghai. He is from a town north of North Korea in China, a small rural town, and it is about his obsession with America and his wanting to get out, feeling like he's trapped as a prisoner in China. Fate aligned to keep him trapped and to stop him from being able to get out, and the ways that kind of turns him into a kind of more bitter man. And he, in the future, is married to this American woman in 2007, and her daughter, we also have from her perspective, constantly being referred to as a Laowa, which I'm definitely getting those tones wrong, but is described as a foreigner, and the kind of feeling of not being not being connected, and her mother, who's always grown up calling her partner, and it's always been the two of them, but now she's married and she is slowly sort of coming to terms with her relationship with her mother, coming of age, getting involved with the international school and with expats, and this sort of kind of fetishization of China, this use of China as a playground and as a place where you can get away with anything, and also with like wealth and how that affects your experience of China. And I think it was interesting in terms of those things that it was exploring, the sort of idea of what it means to be Chinese and of how your experience of China is so dependent on wealth and status, and kind of an obsession with that and of growth and of getting on, and kind of the fascination with and also repulsion against the foreign and the outside. And I thought that those things were interesting, and also the ways that this obsession with the other can kind of warp issues to occur in our own lives. But I did find it a little YA, particularly the parts from the daughter's perspective, although there are very like dark adult themes explored that I don't know necessarily would be in a YA book. They are still, it felt a little kind of simplistic in terms of the writing and in terms of the emotions it was exploring. It wasn't as nuanced as I thought that it could have been, and yeah, particularly in terms of the writing, it conveyed what it wanted to convey, but there wasn't anything particularly interesting or gripping about the writing, or poetic or beautiful, or just there wasn't much to say about the writing, and occasionally it fell into a kind of clunky, simplistic kind of version of what it was trying to do. I wouldn't want this one to win a prize. It doesn't have that vibe for me. It's definitely not one that I've fallen for. I think out of the ones that I have read so far, it would probably be 3rd out of 4. Definitely not my favourite. Things are making me think I should maybe have read Soldier Sailor, because I've been seeing more reviews of that recently. But it was so low down on my list of things in terms of the way that the plot synopsis, whether that interested me or not, that that's why I didn't read it. Hello. So I'm a bit behind with this reading. I need to catch up, but I am now about 15% of the way into Enter Ghost by Isabelle Hammad, and my cat is attacking my leg. This is set in Palestine, and it is about a woman who is part Palestinian, part Dutch, grew up in the UK, and she has been working, she's in her 40s, which I love, and has been working as a jobbing actress for all of her life, but is kind of struggling with that. She's never like really taken off, and she's also just come out of quite a difficult relationship, which was an affair with a director, and so she has gone to visit Palestine because she's feeling like not herself and outside of herself, and so she's gone to visit her sister, who works in an Israeli university, and so there were already discussions about like working with the Israelis versus boycotting every Israeli institution, and she feels kind of disconnected. She's never really like absorbed her Palestinian heritage that much, but she has met this director, this female Palestinian director, who is putting on a version of Hamlet in the West Bank. Yeah, we're going to go from there, and I am really enjoying this so far. The writing is great. It's really has moments of real beauty, but is also really like straightforward and absorbing, and I am really enjoying it. I'm so glad I picked this one. The shore was thick with bathers, lying in and out of the shade of coloured umbrellas. Escape was never really an escape, that was the problem. You only stumbled from one thing to another. I stripped down to my bikini and asked an elderly Israeli couple if they'd mind watching my things, and then I winced over the hot sand. The water was delicious around my ankles. Someone was doing breaststroke in an old-fashioned swimming hat with applique flowers. A little girl paddled in the shallows with a toy baby on her hip. On the beach, lifeguards in high-up chairs dictated in Hebrew through megaphones. I did not know what they were saying. I plunged into the cold and swam for the deeper water. The boys jumped ahead of me on the waves, and the waves rose like snow-capped mountains, crashing before they reached me. It's just really nice reading, so definitely glad I picked this one up, and I'm going to keep reading it today. It's like 6:45 in the morning, and I am supposed to cycle into work, which you might be able to tell I'm not doing, because there is a yellow weather advisory for wind, and also it is chucking it down. So I'm being a bit pathetic, but I think if there's a weather advisory for wind, maybe cycling to work is inadvisable. So yeah, and my cat is just wants to lick me today. Really? So I'm going to wash my hands and then go to work. Hello, so I have finished Enter Ghost by Isabelle Hammad, and I did enjoy this book. I liked the way that it was looking at trying to set up this play in Palestine under siege, and not quite under siege in the way that it is currently under siege, but in that kind of constant low-grade fear of attack and a low-grade discomfort, and also our characters' kind of distance from but desire for connection with her country, as someone who was an outsider, is definitely something I could feel from myself as something to relate to. Like, both my parents are Irish, but I grew up in London, so I have that kind of distance but interest in, and like it's a complicated relationship with a country that I think in some ways is similar, not in all ways obviously, but in some ways. Enjoyed that look at the nuance of it, and I really enjoyed the setting of the play. I don't think I've read many books that have like plays within them, but I definitely really enjoyed that. As a former theatre kid, I definitely enjoyed the rehearsal and the look at the ways to different ways to look at the story, which was talking about the ways that story is told and narrative, the ways that narrative has an effect on conflict, the ways that each side tells narratives about each other and about the past. It's definitely very much a pro-Palestinian book, which is not a surprise, and not something against the book either. Definitely I myself am a pro-Palestinian person. I think occasionally though it was a little heavy-handed. Enter Ghost, the title, is used a lot throughout it. Enter Ghost, Enter Ghost. Obviously we're talking about the ghosts of the past. The ghost of 48 definitely hangs over the book, of the Nakba and of these stories about what the history of that land actually is. Also the ghosts of our main character's past, of her experience with men, her experience with family, the conflicts within the family, like those ghosts are hanging over the book. And I love a literary ghost story. I love using ghosts for this, but I felt like it was a bit too heavy-handed in this book, the way that it was constantly like, enter ghost, because obviously enter ghost is a stage direction from Hamlet, which is in the play. But yeah, I also felt like the plot got a little too easy at times. It got a little cliche and a little heavy-handed, but overall I did enjoy the reading experience of this book. I definitely think it was worth reading, and an interesting book to be on the list. And my second favourite. So I have started Hangman by Maya Binyam, and it is a weird little book, really strangely written. I'm only a quarter of the way through it so far, but the writing is almost abrasive. Like, it is about this man who is from an unnamed country and travelling back to his unnamed home country where he hasn't been for 26 years, and he's on this flight and he's hearing all these weird stories from overhearing them or talking to people, and then something strange happens on the flight, and then he lands and he's waiting for people to come, and he hears more strange stories from other people who are talking to him, and he ends up going, and a man approaches him, calls him brother, which is all in the synopsis, and then he goes to his house, and it's just so bizarre. There's nothing like straightforward. It's not really clear what's going on. His plane ticket's been bought for him, his bag's been packed for him, and just lots of weird stuff keeps happening. And yeah, I'm all for it. I'm all for this weird abrasive writing and like the David Byrne of it all. But it's just bizarre, and I don't really know how to describe it. Like, the writing itself is really simplistic, but everything that is being written about is so weird. I'm halfway through Hangman now, and I am still enjoying it, although not loving it. I don't know, it's so strange the way that it's written, but the actual story is very plotless. We're just moving across this country where this man is from, and he's talking to different people, and they are telling their story. They're telling him various different stories. It's strange why these strangers are talking to him like this. But these stories are kind of building an idea of this country and the history of this country. It's in sub-Saharan Africa, and there has clearly been a moment when it was run by a communist group of people, and it came out of colonialism and ideas of like democracy and progress, human progress, or the cyclical nature of history, various different discussions going on, and also about our man's past that are slowly unravelling, his link to these changing political moments in his country. And I think he has left this country for 26 years and is now returning, and he was in, I believe, the States, because he talks about being a taxi driver and buying a medallion, and I think that that's a New York thing. It is a very strange book, very quick read, so I'm going to keep going and see if it becomes less murky in terms of what it's trying to do. Like, I don't mind murkiness in terms of plot or character, but I want some sense of perspective or direction. Hello, I have finished Hangman by Binyam, and that ending got me. It worked for me. I think that if I was a little bit more of an intelligent reader, or someone used to reading books with kind of twists, I might have seen it coming, but I didn't, and I enjoyed it, and it makes me want to reread the book again right away from the beginning, to see what I missed, to see, I mean, I've remembered certain parts of it that I was like, oh, that's why that made sense. So, very well structured. This book is very well structured. I definitely enjoyed the reading experience of it. I think I didn't love this book, and at times the style of the writing got a little grating, like it is very stylistic, and at times it reminded me of, well, okay, this might be a good thing about it, because it reminded me of books that I have read that are in translation, where the translation is so, like, blunt and straightforward and isn't doing much in terms of style, and maybe that's part of the stylisticness of this, because from the way the book was talking, I believe that this is a francophone sub-Saharan Africa country that we are talking about, certainly one with multiple languages, but most African countries have multiple languages, but there was something about Latin in here that made me think it's a francophone country. Interesting to consider that perhaps part of the style is an idea of translation. But it's a very clever book, but it's not a book that connected with me emotionally, like it didn't resonate with me, but it's certainly very clever and very interesting, and I definitely would read it again. And since it takes like 2 hours to read, that definitely wouldn't be difficult. Hello, I am feeling a bit stir crazy. I went to a wedding this weekend and I sprained my ankle dancing too enthusiastically, and then my boyfriend has gone to Manchester for work, so I am stuck in my house because I can't walk that far, by myself. So that's fun. But I have started Acts of Desperation by Nolan, and two things about this and the Wren. One of the characters in here is called Mia Enright, and the Wren is by Anne Enright. I think that's probably a coincidence, but still interesting. And then I also watched a interview with Anne Enright talking about the Wren and talking about how she wrote the younger character in the Wren, and she was talking about reading books by young people and how she always likes to be up to date with reading books by young people. And she talked about Megan Nolan's previous book, Acts of Desperation, as well as Nisha Dolan and Sally Rooney. So she's talking about various different young Irish writers, and yeah, I just thought that was interesting. She talks about Acts of Desperation, and now I am reading Ordinary Human Failings. This is set on a council estate in the 1990s in South London. It's in Nunhead, which is like 2 miles from where I grew up. It is about a family of Irish immigrants who are living in this estate, and at the beginning of the book, a small child from the estate, I think she's 3 years old, has been murdered, and the blame is starting to fall on this family. And there is also a journalist, a male journalist who is from Kent, I think, Essex maybe, who is trying to discover what's going on with the story. He's got an idea already of what the story is, what he's trying to sell, and he works for, I think it's probably the Daily Mail, it could be the Sun, that kind of newspaper. It's that sort of Benefit Street Britain kind of journalism, which is very classist and racist and unnuanced, and so yeah, I'm going to see how this plays out. I do enjoy the writing of it so far. It's very engaging and kind of dark, but in a very, like, it's very like gritty dark kind of, but not in a annoying crime drama way so far. It was not that she disliked him. His life, unrecognisable as it was, working in energy, living in Kidbrooke, father of 2 fat baby boys, was unseemly to her, as hers must have been to him. They had shared the unique burden of their childhood, stood guard over it together, so that now, in the absence of that duty, they were lost and useless before one another. I just like the way that it's written. And it is looking at various different people around this family and around this estate, and how they are drawn into this. So far, at least. I have just finished part 1. I'm now on to part 2, and I think that the dates change, as far as I'm aware. Oh, the other link between this and the Wren, the young mum in this is called Carmel, and the mum in the Wren is also called Carmel, so they're very linked. Hello, I am halfway through Ordinary Human Failings so far, and I am enjoying it. It is well written, it is engaging, the characters are interesting. I would say so far though that the plot is fairly predictable. So I talked about the death of the young girl that sort of sparks it off, but then we go back in time to 1978 and to Carmel being a teenager, and like how they ended up coming to London, why they ended up coming to London. And it's set in Waterford, which is a city in Ireland but not a big city. She starts like to feel feelings for she's 15, 16, her, and the man she started to feel feelings for is like 23. And it's just fairly predictable what happens from there. Sort of Ireland and in the 1970s, and the issue with the treatment of women and women's sexuality at the time. And so, yeah, what happens is kind of what you know is going to happen. And so I wouldn't say it's particularly profound or moving yet, not that it can't be. And also there's the way that this relates to what's happening in 1990 and the death of this little girl and the journalist and things. So there is more surrounding it and more to uncover. But it is a very short little book, and I think I will read it fairly quickly. Finished Ordinary Human Failings, and with that I have finished reading my Women's Prize shortlist. But first I will review this for you. I thought it was very well written, very simply written, but in a way that communicated the emotions very well, and the characters through it were well rounded. It is very much a look at this one specific family and their experience of this sort of tragedy. It's a very sad book. There's a lot of like sadness in it, and that can be difficult to read, but I definitely thought that was well done. However, I would say I found it a little dull, so the premise sets up this idea that it is going to be kind of scandalous, this sort of what is going on with this family, what is going on with this potential murder of a small child, and we have the kind of stand-in for the reader is this journalist who is for a terrible rag of a newspaper trying to get the story out of this family, trying to like wheedle his way in. And so, but this book is not about that. The book is about ordinary human failings. It is about the banality of tragedy and how that is nonetheless still tragic and terrible and big for the family, despite the fact it's not big enough for a scandalous newspaper. And whilst that is interesting, and it was a lot about telling stories about oneself, and I enjoy that as a concept, I just found that it kind of dragged, and despite being a very short book, it did get kind of dull for me to read towards the end there. Like, I felt like I knew what she had done, what she was doing, 100 pages in, and then it just kept going. Like I was saying earlier, the plot of the beginning was very predictable, but it is about ordinariness and banality, so it makes sense. I just didn't like, it's not unintelligently done or pointless. That there is a reason that it is like this, but I didn't particularly enjoy the reading experience of that. Like, it was fine and readable, but not compelling enough. It didn't make me want to keep picking up the book and keep going back to it. So whilst I respect it, I didn't fall for it. So as I said, I have finished reading my Women's Prize shortlist. Of course, as I said at the beginning, I would actually have to read the whole long list to know what my actual shortlist would be. But what I did, I DNF'd 8 Lives of a Centuries Old Trickster, so it didn't actually make the shortlist. Then my least favourite of the ones I finished would be In Defence of the Act by Effie Black. I found this one very constructed. I felt like it was... it didn't feel very real or very well developed. It all felt very like trying to manipulate you, and I thought that it was supposed to be an exploration of the idea of suicide and like the philosophy of how someone, like of philosophy of death, and of it kind of ended up like inspirational quotes rather than particularly interesting philosophy. Then I think above that I would put River East, River West, which I listened to the audiobook of but don't have here. It was a little YA, and I didn't love the writing style, but I thought it was a very interesting story, and I liked the way that it was told, the structure that it was told. The main character's mother, Sloane, did I wrap that one up? I'm not sure I did. But the main character's Mother Sloane I found to be a very interesting character, and I liked the way that she was slowly uncovered through the perspectives of the different people around her. But I would have liked it more if it would have been more about her and less about Teenagers Go Wild in Shanghai. Then I would put Audrey. I thought it was very accomplished but kind of dull. Then I think Hangman and Enter Ghost are similar levels for me. I don't know which way around I would put this. Maybe Enter Ghost and then Hangman, but I feel like those two could change around at different times. I found them both, like, Hangman was the most interestingly structured, the most interestingly written, and also the ending really worked for me. Very interesting look at immigration and the return story, the return home story, and like looking at the way immigration is seen in the news, and also like politics and like being a refugee, fleeing political stuff, and like the way that everything was kind of slightly hidden. I enjoyed that. And Enter Ghost was also political, being set in Palestine and a lot about the occupation. And I enjoyed it as well. As I said, I enjoyed the way that it was talking about play, and I enjoyed the characters, and I thought that it was well done. But my favourite would be The Wren by Anne Enright. Even though, again, I wouldn't say this was like a 5-star book for me. I thought the writing was the most beautiful out of any of the books. I really enjoyed the voice. I thought, again, the characters were really well done, and the way that she looked at identity and story and history and family history was the most interesting out of all of the books. So that would be my favourite. My winner of the Women's Prize would be The Wren. Although, of course, I haven't read all of them. Now I need to find out what actually made the shortlist. But my camera is dying and I need to go out. So I will see you tomorrow. Hello, so the Women's Prize for Fiction Shortlist has now been announced. So let's see how well I did picking them, and whether I fancy reading any of the things that didn't make it. So the shortlist is The Wren by Anne Enright, which, as I said, was my favourite that I read. Brotherless Night by Vivi Ganeshananthan, which is one that I was kind of interested in reading. No, actually, I wasn't particularly interested in Brotherless Night. Then we have Restless Dolly Mauder by Kate Grenville, and I have actually read 2 books by Kate Grenville in the past. Secret River, which I loved, and another one that I can't remember the name of that came out a couple of years ago, which I didn't really like, and that was kind of what put me off. Plus, it also, if you see the like cover of it, it's definitely giving that women's historical fiction vibe, that like we have kind of a illustrative, floral or fruit themed thing all around the edges with a women silhouette, sort of a cartoonish women silhouette, which is giving very much the kind of women write historical fiction that I don't like, that like Stacey Halls or Jessie Burton or I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but there are tons of them, and they just aren't my vibe, which is one of the reasons I was not interested in reading that one. Then we have Enter Ghost, which was also pretty high on my list of ones that I enjoyed. Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy, which is the one actually out of everything on the list that I was like, when I decided to read River East, River West, it was either that or Soldier Sailor. So I was like, I almost read that one. That one almost made my list, and it's the one from this shortlist that I potentially would read in future. And then the final one is River East, River West by Aubre Lescure, which I did read in this vlog, and it wasn't one of my favourites. So we have my favourite and one of my that came in the second place, and then one that came a bit lower that made it into this list, and then 3 that I didn't read, and I'm not going to, except, as I said, maybe Soldier Sailor. I feel like pretty confident in my choices to have picked the ones that interested me from the list rather than only reading the ones that came to the shortlist. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Did you enjoy this new format, this new way of doing things? I definitely think I enjoyed reading the books more than I potentially would have, although who can say, because I haven't read the others, but I have enjoyed doing this more than I have reading the Women's Prize in previous years. Of course, there are always different judges, so it's very difficult to know for sure if it's because of my interest in the books rather than because of the list itself. So I don't know, but I would love to hear your thoughts and your comments down below. If you enjoyed this new way of doing things, should I do this with a booker as well? If you are new here, my name's Roisin. I put out new videos twice a week most of the time, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.